when the world's too dark of a place to be, and you need an escape from reality. Open up those pages and sci-fi or fantasy, whatever genre you please. And join a book club, 'cause you won't read it on your own. Join a book club, so you'll be held accountable. It's just a means to an end, but you're doing it with your friends, so join the book club by DLC.
Hello, book clubbers! It's been a couple of weeks. Thank you for sticking around and being patient with us as we've taken a little bit of time off, traveled a bit. I'm Jeff Kanata. I'm here with Lana Bashinsky. Hi, Lana.
Hello, Jeff. I am honestly so excited that we're getting back into things. I have felt the drought of the Malazan world, and I'm so excited to get into House of Chains. But first, something pretty special we did today.
Pretty special. We, once again, this is our second chance to have the author himself, Mr. Steven Erikson, back on the show with us. He sat down. We talked over an hour about memories of ice and all sorts of stuff, writing, life. It's a wonderful chat. We're grateful to him for being here and doing it with us again, being so generous with his time.
Mm-hmm.
So, let's get right to it and introduce Steven Erikson. We are joined once again by, I'm going to say it, our friend, the author of the Malazan Book of the Fallen, Mr. Steven Erikson. Welcome back. How are you?
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation. I'm happy to be here.
We're delighted to talk to you again. And I have to start by apologizing. I think every time I said it last time, I said Malazan Books of the Fallen, and I had to be corrected. You're too kind to correct me in real time, but I continue to screw it up.
I didn't notice. Sorry.
Okay, well, that's good. That's good. We're speaking to you now, having completed Memories of Ice, the third novel. And so, if you're watching this, spoilers for everything up through the third novel of the Malazan Book of the Fallen. And the first thing, I suspect you have answered this question numerous times, but I'm going to ask you to do it again. I would love to know the story of losing the manuscript for this novel. I can't imagine how devastating that must have been.
It was so devastating. I switched tracks and wrote Deadhouse Gates instead. Yeah, it was about I think 280 odd pages. And I was using what's it called it was a Brother word processor, WP 500 I think it was called. It was about an 80-pound word processor. So it had a small monochrome screen and a huge daisy wheel printer attached to it. And it had a kind of a hinged handle, but it was immensely heavy. And it took floppy disks, but it only recorded onto one side of the floppy disk. So its maximum recording was, I think, 64 KB.
Right.
So I had all these files. I still have the diskettes, but it turns out that even Brother cannot read these diskettes. Even the company that invented this thing cannot read the diskettes.
So it's there. You just can't read it?
It's gone. It's gone. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, yeah, that was one of the problems is, and this has happened when I've lost like 2 pages or something, when something's just dropped out and I've lost it, is that when I go back immediately to rewrite, it's never as good as the original version.
Right.
And so I was looking at 280 odd pages and thinking whatever I write is not going to be what I had written. And so I basically switched tracks. And it turned out, though, that structurally Deadhouse Gates should have been the second book all along. So I think what I was thinking at the time was far more linear in the storytelling. But by forcing me over to Deadhouse Gates, that broke up that linearity completely. And then I realized that the first 3 books were kind of a Mobius loop, and that, as a trilogy, that would work perfectly. And so if for whatever reason, I never, the sales weren't good, or I didn't sign a good contract, and I was stuck with just 3 books, they would have stood as 3 books. as a trilogy.
So I want to just get it very clear. You were writing on the word processor. Like, at what point were you like, time to go process these things? Like, at what point did you realize they were lost? Because you were obviously writing.
Well, I'm trying to remember. It may have been that the diskette it actually got fouled up, and I just couldn't open the files. So even though I may have it kicking around, even if it was a clean diskette, like functional, I still can't open it. But it may be that it's broken, right? It may be that it's something wrecked the diskette.
So when you returned to it, when you said, "Okay, I finished Deadhouse Gates. Now it's time to return to this project," and as now book 3, what was that like? Was it still? I mean, I can only imagine that process of like, I got to redo, even if it's different, even if you've had this new experience, it can't be.
It's still sore.
What was that like?
It was okay, actually. I kind of got a spiritual boost from writing Deadhouse Gates, because it felt like a very tight, complete work. Gardens of the Moon is it kicks open a whole bunch of doors, and it's messing around with conventions of the genre, with tropes and all the rest. So I'm just having a blast writing it. But Deadhouse Gates is where I was sort of able to, I mentioned this before, but roll up my sleeves and dig in to what I wanted to do in fantasy. And I wrote all of that on a Scion MX5, I think it's called. You have no idea. It's like, it was this big. And it's a little lid, and it comes up, a little monochrome screen, the tiniest keyboard you've ever seen.
From one extreme to the other.
Yeah, and it was brilliant. Because I could just slip it into my jacket pocket.
Oh, that's cool.
And I was working at Toyota in the UK, the head office there, and I would just go off to the nearby mall for lunch, and I'd just sit and write.
Wow.
And then when I finished work every day, we were living in Dorking in Surrey in England. So I would take the train back, and before I got home, I'd stop in at a place called the Café Rouge, and I'd write for 2 more hours. And then, and it was just a blast to write. I mean, it wrecked my eyes. It was all so small. Yeah.
And I imagine if you're like me, you would have been printing every page. I finished a page, print it out, have a hard copy.
Well, it's interesting. It had a little sort of flash drive, I guess, of some kind. But the problem was it ran on 2 AA batteries.
Oh my gosh.
You got 30 hours of writing time off the 2 AA batteries, which was phenomenal. But if you were writing and you hadn't backed it up, and the batteries died, everything you'd written was gone.
It gives me anxiety. How do you
writing
risk
without a
that?
net.
How do you go through the experience with losing memories of ice and being like, you know what? I trust these batteries. Duracell? I trust.
Well, no, you could, like I said, you could plug in this external memory device. So as long as I was repeatedly, saving on that, it was okay. And I would you can monitor the batteries. Like, there was a little thing that showed you what the batteries were doing. But it was always kind of nerve-wracking to switch out batteries. Absolutely.
So originally the book was going to be called Stuff I Definitely Know, and then after you lost it was like Memories of Ice. I'm hoping I remember.
Pretty much. And the weird thing is, what I remember the most is that whole sequence of the flashback on Seven Cities, the formation of the bridge burners.
Yeah.
I know for a fact that my original version was far better than what I wrote. And that sucks. That really sucks.
Oh, man.
I find that to be so fascinating. Through my study of art and visual art, there's been many times that I've lost something. I use a program called Maya, notoriously crashes. It's like a meme in the animation community of just programs crash, it happens. But the sort of feeling from people is that it will be better, faster. It will be better, and you will do it faster than you did the first time. Almost always. Have you ever experimented with that, like as almost like a a form of meditation, or like a Zen release of like writing something and then like letting that go and rewriting it and letting it go, just to as like a practice? Or are you like always very
No.
confident, like I said what I wanted to say?
Yeah. Well, I get into a zone when I'm writing.
Mm.
Very, very mindful. Um, I know it sounds strange because you think mindful is the awareness of everything around you in your space and time at that moment. But I would be mindful of the world I was in, the
Mm.
imaginative world that I'd moved into. Um, and there's a lot of spontaneity involved. There's a lot of sort of creation on the fly. And when it's brand new, to me, I might be wrong, but it feels better than when I'm having to repeat something that I know I did once before,
Yeah.
and uh, something of that sense of newness or invention or inventiveness um, has just gone by the wayside, and so now
Mm.
it's just it becomes work at that point, and
Yeah.
you're trying to remember what you wrote. You're trying to remember the actual sentences and piecing together um, the cadence of things and that kind of stuff. And it's a different process. I've had to do it. I've had to rewrite like 2 pages I lost,
Mm.
um, and quite often it's not exactly the same, obviously, but uh, the key elements are still there, but they don't feel as fresh as when I did it the first time.
It reminds me of that. There's a quote from Anthony Hopkins who said that the process of acting is for him is he reads the work aloud, and then every time he's trying to get it back to what he did that time.
Yeah,
You know?
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, yeah.
So
Go
one of the
ahead.
things I think that is really interesting that you said is, having to pivot to Deadhouse Gates, which ended up being like this little serendipitous piece, and that it should have been the second book anyway. I'm curious about how things sort of changed, if it was going to be something much more linear, and now you have sort of these two pieces that, like, at what point in writing Deadhouse Gates were you like, oh, this should sit on concurrent with Memories of Ice? And what were the challenges then in
Oof.
sort of having both storylines in your head at the same time?
Well, that was one of the problematic aspects of it, was that I had the story Memories of Ice was already present. It was running parallel in my head while I was writing Deadhouse Gates.
Mm-hmm.
So when there was crossover, i.e., Tregal Trade Guild, I had no issues with it, right? Because they were both living in my mind at the same time. So that was the one of the pitfalls of um, writing the Deadhouse Gates when I wrote it. I mean, if it had appeared as the third book, okay, granted, structurally, none of that works anymore. But if it had appeared as the third book, you wouldn't have had any issues with the Tregal Trade Guild showing up,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Um, so, some in some respects that that created problems for me was to know that these two things were running in parallel, but the audience is only going to get this stuff in Deadhouse Gates first, and then they're going to have to wait for Memories of Ice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it was.
How did you decide which moments that you wanted to sort of reveal from the other side? Was it something that just felt right, like once you started
Yeah,
going through
yeah,
Memories
I
of
would have to.
Ice?
Yeah, I'd have to feel right on the moment. I think Quick Ben's commentary when he pops in on Deadhouse Gates and then pops back out. I had no idea what kind of trouble he was in, but I knew he'd be in some kind of trouble. So, so
That's cool. You just mentioned the process of writing for you is inventive and creative, and obviously so. But I'm curious about how much discovery happens for you in the moment, and what that's like. You sit down. I imagine you have a scene that you're going to write, and what part discovery plays in the process.
oh, it's huge. I had no idea that Itkovian was going to take over the end of the novel the way he did.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
he was just probably the first time you're introduced to the Grey Swords is through Itkovian, I think. So he was just somebody out patrolling, and he was the officer. And then I decided, no, he was going to be one of those three um, quasi-religious roles, shield anvil. And I remember coming up with the phrase shield anvil and thinking, well, what the hell does that mean? I have no idea. But I would find out, and I would find out through Itkovian. And what I wanted to do with the Gray Swords was to impose a kind of archaic diction that wasn't present anywhere else. And so they are very formalized in their structure and in the way they speak to each other. And so it was going to feel very different. That was the plan, anyways. Um, and so, yeah, they are very much self-contained culture, and that's going to have its own characteristics, its own peculiarities. And so, when you create a character who's going to be sort of your front runner in delivering that kind of info, that character just starts growing in front of you. And I just found that uh, that's the rewarding part of this kind of writing for me, is the discoveries part, right?
Yeah.
If I've mapped everything out to the last, you know, the last detail, every street, every window, et cetera, et cetera, that would take all the life out of it. And I know with uh, many people who come up to me who are beginning fantasy writers who are doing their world building, and they tell me they've got 6 volumes of notes on the world. I want to say to them, you're killing it. Stop. Right? Because that level of detail will actually lock you up. You need to be able to invent on the fly. You need to entertain yourself as you're writing. That's the whole purpose of the writing initially. That's where your fuel comes from. It is you imagining this story unfolding in front of you as if you were a reader, and you're being surprised and entertained as you go. I mean, why else would we read? So that mindset, it needs to be there for the writer. Otherwise, you just don't have the resources of energy, because you've already poured all that energy into the world building.
That's so interesting. I would think that most people would assume you are the poster child for the 6 volumes of notes, because your world is so dense and so detailed.
Realized, yeah.
Yeah.
So there may be a box of maybe 2 boxes of game notes, but game notes are a whole different beast, right?
Yeah.
They're just stats mostly, NPC stats and that kind of stuff, item stats, and maps, lots of maps. And yes, we made use of the maps, definitely. But no, it was a hot mess in terms of our so-called archives. AP, he actually came out and stayed with me for a short while, and I set him the task of organizing my books and my archives, because he's got to earn his keep, right?
Right, sure.
And it was, he spent a long time doing it. Let's put it that way.
I feel like that would be a treat as well, right? It's like, maybe
no.
a chore, but also going through being like, oh my gosh, look at all these.
Oh, sure.
Like, feels like precious artifacts.
Yeah, no, he'll be going through all these really interesting sort of character sheets and all the rest, and then he flips a page and there's a Visa bill that I hadn't paid, 8 years ago. So it was, like I say, it was a mess. And I know,
but it's a Visa bill of ice.
Yes, there it is. Yes. Well, certainly the interest would be. Yeah. Cam says he's lost a lot of the stuff in his moves. It vanished. The boxes vanished. So when we meet up and when we have conversations, we'll often, if we need to, we'll plumb each other's memories and see what we can piece together. But quite often it's just our sensibilities of the thing that we remember the most, the fun we had while we were gaming. And so there would be, key scenes that we both remember, but we remember them differently, which is fine. So we talk that stuff through. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite artifact or like a favorite thing that was lost from those times that you hold very precious?
You mean something lost?
Either something that you currently have that's like a physical piece that when you look at it, you're like, yes, that was such a gem of a time. Or like you were just saying, when you get together and talk about those moments, is there like a favorite moment that you discuss?
No, it's probably the maps. Mm-hmm. And I have the maps. And so there's certainly one really early map, because Cam was more experienced running games. So I was a player for a lot at the beginning until I felt that I'd learned enough about running a game to try actually turning Cam into a player and running a campaign. And that early map is it's just a fragment of what later became Gettobacus, near the northwest coast, and that's where some of the early bridge burner stuff was being played out in Black Dog Forest and that kind of stuff. It's
Is
where
it
the
like
mock-
on grid paper? Is that
no, it's just on an 8 by 11
blank sheet?
printing paper.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's where the Mott irregulars actually first show up. Is in those games.
That's cool.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. So I have that map, and it's no longer accurate to the book maps, but it was the first map that of the first campaign I ran, which was cool.
In sharing the world with Ian C. Esselmont, is there ever a moment where either of you do something that the other one's like, I don't know about that?
I don't know if it's. I don't know about that. It's more. You did what? And that happened in the gaming a lot. There was a time we had a huge argument because there was an incident where Animator Rake. This is before sort of his full elevation. Is stranded on a beach somewhere on some island. Dropped out of the sky. He's just stuck there. And so I said, well, okay, he looks at all the driftwood and all the logs and he builds a boat. And Cam says, he has no skill to build a boat. And we had this huge argument that, yeah, of course he can build a boat out of this stuff, right? No, he won that argument. He was right.
Was there anything that was ever decided by the D20?
Yeah.
Where you're like, let's see if he's building a boat.
Well, it wouldn't have been the boat because he was right. I had no skills to do so. I could have just tied myself to a log, aka Far Side, and just done it that way. Right. But yes, and as you move along in the series, you're going to get to that point that other people have talked about because we've talked about it. There was a 20D dice roll that completely altered the direction of the entire series of both Cam and I wrote.
Wow.
All 16 books. And it was down to the first natural 20 between two major characters in a sword fight. And it went the way it went.
That's amazing. That's so cool. I have to say, you bring up Animator Rake, and I will forever have in my mind, I think, one of the most incredible descriptions of a character of all time. Animator Rake is an atmosphere. Like, that is one of the coolest lines I have ever read. Ever. I will never forget that line.
I aspire to be that.
An atmosphere.
An atmosphere, yeah. I probably stole it from John Steinbeck's opening to Cannery Row, right? Cannery Row is a stink.
Yeah, right. So, right. It's a stink.
Fabulous opening line.
So good. In fact, I endeavor to not give you the same questions you've always answered over and over and over again. And so in doing that, I've tried to find every interview with you that I can find. And I came upon one that where you had mentioned that you enjoy discussing specific passages that you have written and, and what went into crafting the words that way. So I'm hoping you'll indulge me. And we always bring up some of our favorite passages at the end of our shows. So I hope you'll indulge me. I can read to you maybe a few throughout this interview, and you can respond to your own words and talk about how that passage came to be, or maybe dissect it for us.
I'm happy to deconstruct stuff. I work better being able to see it. Can you pull up the passage?
Certainly.
Does that make it easier?
I have it here. I'll just post it in our chat.
Cool.
I'll read it out for our audience, but I'll post it here in the. Hopefully that works for you. So here's the passage I want to read to you first. Please, you must comprehend. Memories belong in the soil, in stone, in wind. They are the land's unseen meaning, such that it touches the souls of all who would look, truly look upon it. Touches in faintest whisper, old, almost shapeless echoes, to which moral life adds its own.
Well, that's the That's the essence of archaeology, isn't it?
Mm.
That's exactly what, an archaeologist does when they step out onto the field. Um, and if you can pause in that moment, then yeah, you can start to sense these things. It, to give you an example, when we were in Mallorca, I didn't get a chance to get to the megalithic sites. I kind of messed things up and was too late in trying to rent a car. So um, so we were in a place called Estianx, which was on the southwest coastline, which is a cliffside coastline. So we're walking a lot of really up and down mountain trails, and most of Mallorca is tiered agriculture, tiered I guess also for goats, sheep, and all the rest. So it's got these built stone walls everywhere, and the whole island is just nothing but these stone walls. Um, their access to that kind of building material is the island itself. And so as we're walking those trails, I'm noticing um, everywhere I'm walking, there's Roman pottery, absolutely everywhere. And then we're finding, older chunks of pottery, and these are fairly sort of popular trails for people who are investing in walking holidays. And so you get a lot of people in their full gear, walking up and down with their walking sticks and all the rest. And you know, there's so much that's being missed. It's right underfoot. It's right there. And so that's certainly, I think, what I'm touching on in that example. The first, was that early in the book or is that later?
I think this is. I think this is when I should have noted it. I did not note it, but I think it's kind of midway, or
Right.
maybe sort of last third.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because when I started it, I was still living in the UK, and right above the town where I lived is an old trackway that's 10,000 years old, worth of people moving back and forth on it. So, you go out on walks and stuff, and you're walking that, and you're following in those ghostly footprints. And that to me is what is what drew me to archaeology all along. And then to sort of infuse that into the fantasy settings is to give that deep time sense of the world that you're building. So that's not something that was invented 2 weeks ago and just popped in there. I'd have to look at the sentences, but structurally there's certainly a cadence to those lines, and the use of clauses creates a kind of a temporal rhythm, if you will, which is also invoking that deep time as well. So quite often, you can build a sentence to match the sentiments that are expressed in that sentence.
Yeah, the truly look upon it forces the reader to slow down and process. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, step by step. Right. So, yeah.
It's so beautiful, and I think so much of Memories of Ice. I mean, obviously, the title is resonant throughout. I mean, you use the phrase "Memories of Ice" numerous times in the novel, and that notion of like memories being this precious resource almost that needs to exist somewhere, and the idea of placing it in the environment and that it deserves to be there, I found to be such a powerful idea.
Yeah, I think we in the New World, if you want to call it that, we transplants, European transplants into North America, and the the history that is part of the foundational history of these present nations of Canada and the U.S. and Mexico and all the rest. It's a fairly truncated one. It's a fairly short one, and when you go to Europe, and you're walking in places that are showing sort of multiple examples of technology in the architecture and the building styles and all the rest. it's much more immediate, right? You've got people who are living in places that some of the foundational walls, go back to the 10th century or 9th century. Um, unless you're living in an abandoned Anastasi village, you're not going to get that here, right?
Mm.
In our world.
Yeah.
So there is that sense of deep time that we, if you're living in a place like in Europe, it's all around you. I mean, you're embraced by it in a sense.
Mhm.
And to me, I've always found that to be somewhat astonishing and profound.
Yeah.
So then, living over North American side, do you feel like a distinct loss of that? I know you travel so much, like doing archaeology and sort of immersing yourself in that time and in that discovery. But, if you were to, sit down and write something new, do you feel that like not being so immersed in it on the daily is something that would be like distinct absence for you? Or do you feel that because it's such a focal point in your life that you would still feel like infused by that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, growing up, like my family was really poor, and so we'd go out and we'd go fishing in Manitoba on the weekends, basically to stock up as one of the standing freezers for the winter. So catching a lot of fish to eat. Um, and one place we were at is just outside, just north of Winnipeg. It's where you have the two rivers, the Assiniboine and the Red River, have conjoined, and they're heading out towards Lake Winnipeg. And a large dam was built quite a long time ago, called Lockport. And I remember as a kid, we used to go out there and there'd be fishing. We'd be fishing all the time at Lockport, right below the dam. Um, what I didn't even realize until much later is that that's one of the largest native settlement sites in all of Manitoba. It's also the northernmost evidence of the growing of maize anywhere in North America. So returning to that area, um, I'm suddenly, as an archaeologist, I'm seeing what was not, was always in front of me as a child, but just hadn't noticed. But
Hmm.
the entire village is eroding out of the bank, and so there's just pottery and stone tools and bones, bison bone, moose, um, just scattered up and down the shoreline. And I don't know how I missed it, as a kid. So there's nowadays now I'm not as bothered by that sort of absence of depth in North America, because all it means is a lot of the activity, including the indigenous activity, is compacted. It's in a more shallow strata, if you will.
Hmm.
But it's all there. And then you go to.
So it's more accessible. Is that what you're saying?
Uh, it is in a
Hmm.
lot of ways,
Hmm.
and it's as a history, it's closer than one thinks.
Hmm.
But I mean, when I was down in Central America, and I visited quite a few of the Mayan sites, even though what I was in Belize, what I was digging was actually archaic. So it was stone tool technology. It was exactly the same as what I was digging in Manitoba, virtually identical.
Hmm.
But while I travel around down there, I visited a lot of Mayan sites in the Yucatan and in Belize and Guatemala. And there, what you have, because of a tropical environment, once the place is abandoned, it's reclaimed by nature very quickly.
Hmm.
So it starts devouring those pyramids and those buildings at an extremely rapid pace. And that is a little bit different from, say, sections of Roman walls in Barcelona, for example, because or London for that matter, because the only thing that's affected that stuff has been people robbing the stones to build other things.
Mm.
So you can often find, like in some of the old churches in Barcelona, some of the foundational stones are chunks from Roman temples,
Mm.
Wow.
and the carving's still on there. So that's present, but it's present as part of the ongoing dialogue humanity has with history, and so they're taking stones from older buildings, or they're using the foundations of older buildings to build their new ones. But if you're down in the jungles of Central America, it ain't so, right? That stuff's just covered. It's just grown over, and that's that's its own kind of lesson in history for sure.
So
Wow.
one of the scenes that really I thought so much about you and your love of archaeology, your passion for it, in the scene where, so sorry. Hitan goes to the mass council and sort of confronts them and is like, dig up the floorboards, baby. I know they're here. Was that inspired by any particular moment, or is that just sort of a culmination of a lot of these ideas of, things being lost to time but being right underfoot? Is that like a really explicit expression of things that you've experienced? Or
Yeah,
can you talk
sure.
specifically about that moment and what it meant to you as well as to the characters present in the scene?
Well, a lot of that moment is actually about how does a culture that, in a sense, has forgotten elements of its past, how does it reinterpret those aspects? How does it build its identity on the basis of either fragmented memories or false memories? And so that's kind of what is part of the existential struggle that the Barghast are in. So they're trying to find their feet in terms of their own past,
Right.
and but the precedent of temples being built on top of older temples is one you'll find everywhere, and Christian temples, churches built on top of Roman temples, pagan temples, or built near traditional pagan springs, holy springs, which then become connected to some saint, for example. But that there's a much older pagan presence there, and that is the case. Even here in North America. I mean, it was certainly the case in places like Peru and in Mexico, where the Spanish were consciously suppressing the old religion by building on top of and robbing out the stones of the older structures. So there was a concerted effort to negate the cultures of the people they were oppressing, the indigenous peoples. But you'll find it here too, in North America, in Canada for that matter. Churches will rise up in places that had significance prior to it, and so it's almost like an ongoing war of belief systems that you can read in the architecture.
That's wild.
It is. It's interesting. So
Yeah,
that's kind of what was going on with the Barghast, trying to reclaim their sovereignty, if you will, that was tied to that part of the land.
Yeah. Just as a point of clarification for me, the masked council's masks, do you imagine them being mechanical or magical?
Yeah.
Mechanical?
No, they're clunky and mechanical. Yeah.
I love it. Yeah, that's what I was imagining too. These kind of kabuki masks almost.
Yeah.
I have a question about one of my favorite characters of the novel, Buke. I love that character. He's clearly, not a main character in the novel, but he gets such a beautiful arc, albeit brief, and such I found to be gorgeous, haunting backstory. Can you talk a little bit about Buke as a character and sort of, his arc and where he ends up?
Well, he's certainly, if memory serves, he's a character that was invented again on the fly. I guess somebody for whom, who could have conversations with Gruntle and provide, certain aspects of background. And then I tied that into Bocalane and Corporal Broach and their storylines, which was all intended only as an introduction to the novellas. So, Bokalane and Corvo Broach showing up were just, they were my brief introduction.
That's cool.
So yeah, I knew they wouldn't, and they don't reappear in the books, in the series. You'll be happy to know.
Oh, we love those characters.
Love those nasty guys.
Well, they get their own stage, all through the point of view of Emancipor Reese for the most part.
Oh, that's wonderful.
They're manservants.
Delightful.
Yeah,
we love poor Emancipor.
He's great fun. He's great fun. So, anyways, what was the question again? It was regarding.
I'm just
Buke.
speaking about Buke. Yeah.
So of course, my schooling was all in short stories. That's what I learned to write, and so Buke is basically a short story that's partitioned and spread out across the novel. Yeah. Mind you, you can say that for almost everything in the novel. They're short stories. And again, where I was going to take him. I think at some point in writing this particular book, Memories of Ice, is where I sort of belatedly stumbled on the idea that the fantasy genre can take metaphors and make it real, and that's what it can do better than any other genre. And of course, within contemporary fiction, magic realism would sort of, especially the stuff produced out of Latin America, would certainly match that. Or even Calvino and people like that, European writers. And that's precisely what they're doing. So taking metaphors and making it real. So, dead angel falls in your backyard and you got to deal with that. Well, fantasy does it all the time. And so I was consciously aware that I was going to be addressing primarily postpartum depression in this novel. But of course, once you get into that mindset and into that track of, whatever I put in here can have potentially metaphorical significance. Then Buke and his final the resolution of his story was just this wonderful metaphor made real, where his history, his insurmountable tragedy that he simply is unable to deal with. Quite often in our world, people fall into a kind of a catatonic state at that point.
Yeah.
And they're lost to us. So one can see that in negative terms, but I didn't want to see it in negative terms. I wanted to offer to Buke the blessing of oblivion. And so that's where that whole notion of becoming the bird who can just fly away from all of it is his storyline.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the perfect example of metaphor made real, right? You want to be a bird and just fly away, and he actually does.
And he actually does.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Are you ever at all surprised at which characters you write that end up resonating so deeply with your audience? Is there
all the time? Yeah.
What's a character that you found that readers were really struck by that you were not at all anticipating?
Well, certainly Rake to begin with, and I think I gave my reasons last time for that. Right? Oops. Oh, for a minute I thought you guys froze up.
Oh, we're here.
That was scary.
We're here. Yeah.
No. Okay. Right. Okay.
You have reason to be afraid. Our software is flaky, but no, I think we're okay.
Yeah. So I was surprised at the audience reaction to Rake because I kept him at such a distance, and avoided his point of view.
He's an atmosphere.
Yeah, I guess.
He's the coolest.
I guess. Yeah, and interestingly, that response after Gardens of the Moon, it definitely shaped how I was going to approach Animated Rake for the rest of the series. And it's one of those instances where the reader response is an informative and educational one for the writer, and can give them a direction in which to go. So I'm always appreciative of that. But for other characters, no, quite often it's the case of characters that I end up I guess finding the most rewarding to write their storyline.
Mhm.
That 9 times out of 10, most readers have no interest in at all. So it's mostly the other way around, right? I mean, I remember the initial responses to the MIBE. I think you call it the maybe.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
know.
that's okay. No, it
we did
doesn't matter.
wrong.
Doesn't matter.
Every time we're going to talk to you, I'm like taking notes. I'm like, hey, right, Boca Lane,
I
the MIBE.
I meant to talk to you, Lana, as I listened to the interview right as soon as we finished it, and he was saying the MIBE, and I was like, oh man.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Anyways, similar to Felicin in Deadhouse Gates, the amount of sort of negative commentary regarding her initially was really quite surprising. Everybody was bored by her. They didn't like her. They hated her.
I'm part of the problem.
They skipped past those scenes, that kind of stuff. And well, I put a lot into that because that was quite a central theme in what I was exploring.
Well, I tell you, mispronunciation aside, the MIBE is a character that's very meaningful to me. I mentioned on the show that I read an entire passage out loud to my wife. She and we are parents to a child with special needs, and you spoke about it being about postpartum depression, but I think it applies even more broadly. It certainly resonated for us just being parents. I think parents in general, regardless of your child, but particularly for us, our child is very, very demanding, and it takes that idea of giving endlessly and feeling that drain, and you have the love, but I mean, it's so beautifully expressed. Anyway, I'll let you.
No, it's one of those complicated subject matters that I don't want to be dismissive here, but I think a level of maturity is required to sort of grasp what's going on here.
Yeah.
To approach that from the child's point of view, or even the young adult's point of view, they don't have the experience to understand that, right? And it's like so many things. You almost can't if you haven't lived through it in some fashion or another. So I suppose I could have avoided those kind of things, but I learned even by the time I was really getting into writing Felicin and Deadhouse Gates, I realized that no, I'm going to go for these uncomfortable truths and these anti-simplistic, if you want, approaches to the human condition. And some places are not comfortable to inhabit. And I did not like the idea that just because it was a fantasy novel, that I was going to avoid those places of discomfort. So you are now forewarned that there's more coming.
Yeah. Well, I think it's amazing how you're able to handle things that could be salacious or offensive. I mean, I'm thinking particularly in this, I'm obviously the Felicin stuff, but in this novel, even there's I'm forgetting the character's name, begins with an S, Gruntel's Stani. Yes. Yes. Stani's, rape is the way you handle that so delicately and beautifully, and it's amazing. It's
well, it to me, I gave the minimum, right? Because that event in and of itself is not the important part. The important part, actually, you won't get to until the 8th book. It is the consequences. It is the consequences.
Yeah.
And those consequences, they're put on hold. So you don't come back to them until the 8th book. But they were, even though they're put on hold, they were not far from reach for me to come back to, because that's what interests me is We all experience things. We've all, you've lived long enough, and you've gone through your traumas. Um, and quite often we're not able to do much with that stuff in the immediate aftermath. That
Mm-hmm.
the reverberations can be decades down the road.
Yeah.
So I was comfortable with that. I know AP and we disagree on this one because um, even though I wrote this thing a long time ago before the phrase fridging showed up, he certainly saw it as an instance of potentially
Interesting.
fridging. I don't agree, but that's AP and I will argue that endlessly. But
So,
I think it's primarily one of the reasons why I don't agree is that it was the banner that actually really compels
Mm-hmm.
Gruntle
Mm-hmm.
to his actions, and the fact that he played very little role in what happened to Stani also dismantles it in some respect. But anyways, yeah, it's a thematic issue, and it's I think I probably no. You see, that's the question I'm asking myself right now is if I was writing this today, would I have not done that scene? And my answer has to be no, I still would have done it because of the consequences and how huge those consequences are in the eighth book.
Mm.
They are central to the eighth book of how Stani is dealing with what she's experienced. So,
Wow.
one of the things I really like about your characters in, not just Memories of Ice, but every book so far is there is a consistency to them. Their actions they are so loud about who they are, even in times where it's like, I'm reading Felicity and being like, oh, I'm so frustrated with this character. I get it. You've been through like deep traumas, and very obnoxious of me to not be as empathetic as I could. But every single turn, she is she is that. She's saying who she is, and every time she acts some way, I'm still like, oh, come on, just be nice. But that's not where she's at.
no.
Um, Ikovian, he does the same thing over and over. He has his role that he so desperately believes, and yet when he takes the pain away, takes the grief away from the Talanamas, it was so stunning and powerful and surprising. Silver Fox is consistently selfish, and yet even the moment she's asked to be selfless, she says no, and that feels like a shock. But these characters are consistently themselves. Do you have strategies for writing these types of characters that are so consistent yet still manage to surprise us with what those actions are?
I guess technically, yes, there is a strategy. And it comes from the short story writing tradition that I came out of. Um, I knew I was going to be writing third person, limited points of view. Um, and the reason why I selected that was, well, there are lots of reasons, but one of the primary ones was that I was thinking in terms of 10 volumes. And as it turned out, well over 3 million words. If I had used a single point of view, that would have been, to my mind, almost unreadable because the style would have been consistent throughout all 10 books. The
Yeah.
voice would have been consistent. And there's only so much of that, of any one voice that anyone can handle. I know I'm a huge fan of George MacDonald Fraser's Flashman books, and they're all from Flashman's voice. But as he was coming to the end of his writing career and his life, and he pumped out, I think, 2 more Flashman books. I struggled reading them because I'd read too many of Flashman's books of that particular voice. But anyways, so I wanted to use that limited third person to keep some variety in the voice and style of the series, so that there was never a particular rut that sort of one falls into, where it becomes almost homogeneous in the sense of the diction levels, the cadence, the rhythms, the way they speak, what they see of the world, how they react to other characters. If that's all from one point of view, that can get pretty oppressive, I think, in a long work. So I wanted to really create a lot of variety in the voice, so that it was always going to be interesting, hopefully. And if it wasn't interesting for somebody, at least the reader would know that, okay, we're going to drop away from this character and move on to my favorite character, later on. So, people who absolutely despise Krupp, for example, they knew that, at some point you'd get to another character and you wouldn't have to worry about Krupp again. So, the voices and diction levels and all that stuff could then jump around a lot. So that was one strategy I had in mind. And what that allowed me to do is, or what invited me to do is, when I go into that character's point of view, I can pick up their internal cadence and their internal, their way of seeing things, and their way of interacting with people. And that becomes sort of, I guess, the guidebook for how that character is going to proceed. And then in short story writing, you're taught to, or you're told to, you're advised to move into the skin of the character you're writing, walk in their shoes, wear their clothes, and see the world from their point of view. So if I'm doing that consistently throughout the series, then yes, when I come back to a character that we've met before, I may go back and read the last section where I'd written that character, just to get that cadence back and that voice back and the rhythms back and all that kind of stuff. And their point of view and how they're seeing the world. Their worldview is crucial. And then I return to that, to that point of view, and I'm back into that voice.
It's so effective. And it's one of my favorite things about these novels is, like you mentioned before, how Itkovian's chapters are so formal and the language is different. And then you're in a Picker chapter, and it's like we're slinging slang, we're having fun. And that's one of the joys of the novel, is that the variety and just the way, and you do feel like you're inside that thought process from those characters' perspectives.
It's third person, but it also goes internal. So and once in a way, the way I feel about it is, if I'm going to go internal, then I'm given permission to use their internal voice and their internal their diction levels and all the rest.
And that was so impactful, especially Boyd Talk coming out. Love seeing that guy, but seeing his voice change and internal voice as he's going through, his physical, emotional traumas with the seer is
getting broken down, basically. Yeah.
Reading that first chapter that I knew was from his perspective, but was not in the voice I recognized, was like a gut punch of a character I love so much, and knowing the pain that he must have been through to be in this space, to sound so different.
To that. Yeah.
It was amazing.
Well, in some really broad respects, Deadhouse Gates is about sisters. And Memories of Ice is about mothers. So they show up in various aspects.
Dino Mother,
yeah. And it's interesting. A lot of that I'm never shy to acknowledge what I steal from. John Gardner's novel Grendel. Grendel's mother is very similar to the Kachin Jamal mother in Memories of Ice. Just this mindless maternal need. And of course, if you think about it, at least thematically, it's kind of the counterpoint to the Maib.
Yeah.
Right. So,
the crushing, controlling mother in a way,
and taking, constantly taking,
right?
And
taking, yeah. And so it's reverse for the Maib, where it's a child who is doing the taking and taking and taking.
Yeah.
So they're both extremes, and they're both obviously crushing in their own way.
Yeah.
One explicitly so.
Yeah.
And I love that acknowledgement of things where you draw your inspiration from. I feel like that is a common question. Oh, where did you get inspired by these things? What is the things that you like pulling into your work. I mean, as the amazing author that you are, do you hear conversations of other people referencing your work? And are those moments exciting when somebody's like, oh yeah, this I stole from Steven. This was my exciting piece. Have you seen reflections of what you've put out into the world in other work that you ingest?
I've seen a couple of examples of first fantasy novels that look really familiar. Yeah. But that's okay. That's all right. In a sense, we all do that. We all, what we read and what had an impact upon us is something. At the same time, at least I can think of two examples where the author in question would never admit that a lot was lifted from Gardens of the Moon. That can be a bit annoying. I have no compunction about describing what inspired me and what excited me and what I stole because I loved it so much. And so I'll always acknowledge that kind of stuff. But sometimes, and I've noticed in panels and stuff and conventions with other authors, there's a kind of coyness regarding that kind of stuff, as if they don't want to acknowledge what influenced them. And I do personally find that frustrating, but I guess they have their reasons.
I agree. I feel like for a long time in the artist communities I was a part of, things were very much about the preciousness of my ideas. My ideas are the most special thing. And it's like, I think the execution of those ideas is what would make what you've created unique. Because I don't think any individual idea is like, oh, it's so innovative. Nobody's ever thought of this thing before.
That's because you haven't seen my ideas, Lynn.
You're so precious with them. But I love that attitude. And like, I think it only makes like the arts and like what we can create richer when we can admit and fully like flourish with each other and inspire each other and admit that that's okay to be inspired by each other, because what you've brought is something unique.
That's what art is.
And it always struck me as odd that one would view writing as competition. Like between writers, because no, I mean, readers are insatiable. That needs to be sort of taken as a given. So no, we're not competing. We're all sort of lucky enough to be part of that library that potential readers can draw from, and that's really great, right?
That's awesome. I know we're getting up against the time here, but I
got lots of time.
Okay, good. I don't know how much time Lana has, but
I have less time.
All right, I got a couple of things I need to know. One of them is, what was the inspiration behind Spindle's hair shirt?
You know what? I wish I knew. Spindle's hair shirt. I have no idea. I mean, I guess I was just throwing in a particular physical detail. In writing books, people often tell you that you want to tag a character with a particular gesture or a mnemonic device that makes us remember who that character is. And of course, I played with that, say with Blend, where the mnemonic device is you never see her, right? So, but Spindle, it's a ridiculous name, and a hair shirt is perfectly suited to a name like that. And then it was a question of, okay, where does this hair shirt come from? And then I just again made it up on the spot.
Another Mother's
thing.
Yeah.
And it got creepier and creepier. So
it's a delight. It's a delight every time it's referenced.
and I'd forgotten about that line where Spindle's hair shirt caught fire. You're right. I mean, I wish I could stumble on lines like that these days, but I don't know.
Well, I mean, there are, as I said, there are a number of lines that we loved. I have a couple of there's one I want to end on, but one of the things we haven't really talked about yet is Geno's Perrin and Silver Fox's relationship, which I think is a very interesting one. From carrying over from Gardens of the Moon, which the resolution is I have a passage here that you wrote that I'd love to I'll post it in our chat again. I'd love to read to you and get your feedback on what it, how you came to it. He says, "I love you still, but with your death, I succumbed to a kind of infatuation. I convinced myself that what you and I had so very briefly was of far vaster and deeper import than it truly was. Of all the weapons we turn upon ourselves, guilt is the sharpest, Silver Fox. It can carve one's own past into unrecognizable shapes, false memories leading to beliefs that sow all kinds of obsessions." I found that so perceptive and beautifully written, and I love your reaction.
I think there was a response from some people reading Gardens of the Moon that they found the romance between Tattersail and Ganos Paran as unrealistic. And so I thought, okay, I guess I need to explain this to some extent, that this was infatuation, and Paran being young confused that with love. And so it really was. It was a fling. I mean, that's basically all it was. And yet, because she dies, he then in turn builds that up into something much greater than it was. Only to have the reality of the Malazan world be such that he has to revisit that actual person that he had the infatuation, and of course, that reality is no match to what he's built up in his mind, and so that's the conflict he's facing, if you will. It's like I don't know if this would be a fair example, but some person in high school that you were absolutely infatuated with, you had a huge crush on, and then
Right.
you don't see them for 15 years, and you come back and you think, what was I thinking?
Right.
Or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Or the opposite, and
Yeah.
you suddenly realize that you've always loved this person, which would be equally cool, right? So
Yeah.
so this is again taking the metaphor, making it real, where this character who's been lost is reborn, but in the act of being reborn is fundamentally changed, and then the one who's been left behind, if you will, has to struggle and deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I remember having a girlfriend in university here when I was in the writing program, who had been in a relationship since she was like 14, and she'd broken up with this guy. And the role I ended up playing was simply the transition zone, right? So boom, I was there for that, to help her break away from this guy. Yeah. And then once my job was done, I was out the door.
Right.
So in other words, in that respect, what you've got is somebody who's changing in front of your eyes in your relationship, and then you realize that you're now redundant to the changes that they've experienced. So I probably internalize that and then externalize it as Paran's scenario with Silver Fox. It's a bit of self-analysis there, but I don't know if it's accurate, but it sounds fine.
Yeah.
Feels resonant.
Good.
Lana, do you have a last question you want to do? I have one I would like to end on, but do you have
let me see quickly. No, you can go ahead.
Great. Well, I want to read a quote in a second, but I think it seems clear to me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. It seems that one of the major themes of Memories of Ice, and I'm told the series at large, but certainly we're only three novels in at this point, but certainly Memories of Ice seems to be in large part about compassion. And it's something that certainly resonated with me on a very deep level, and I found beautiful and moving.
I think for both of us, especially, I mean, we talked a lot about like how much it was tied into like experiencing the real world, and how much we wish, or at least for me, how much I wish that was like a bigger part of real life right now. Sorry, Jeff, continue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no. And the quote that I want to read will certainly, I think, resonate specifically with what's happening in the world today, this exact moment. But before we get to that, obviously there are, all these characters are redeemed, and certainly it's amazing to me that you didn't know where you were going with it, Covian, as you sat down, because it feels like that's the crescendo of the entire novel, But I'm thinking back to the prologue and really the inciting incident of the whole novel. It turns out, as we find out who those characters really were, and that it was Tool's sister, and that the tyrant of the Paniondomen was one of the children. It seems to me that inciting incident was an act of compassion that caused all of this all of these, horrors to come to pass.
Yeah.
And I don't have a specific question here, but I'm curious, that juxtaposition of like compassion there seems to be this almost a treatise on the value of compassion in the bulk of the novel, and yet the thing that kicks off all of the horrors is an act of compassion.
Yeah. The road to hell, right? Paved with good intentions.
Right. Yeah.
Compassion's a complicated theme of the human condition, and so at Covian's particular point of view, that may be the quote you're going to read. I don't know. It's a problematic statement that he makes, and so I understood that, even having just written it. So I knew I would have to return to it and re-explore it. So that's coming. But I guess because I was writing about motherhood in a whole series of fashions, and I'd already lost my mother by that point. So forgiveness and compassion seem to be two forces that are intricately bound to one another. And quite often one could view compassion as forgiveness before the act. So it needs to be there. And I guess, when I said that Covian just sort of came alive on the page, that doesn't mean I necessarily didn't have him heading towards a particular thing regarding the Talana Mass. And for the life of me, I cannot remember when I came upon that storyline and where it was going to go. But certainly somewhere in the midst of writing Memories of Ice. So not preceding it, but in the midst of it. So compassion, because I was writing about motherhood, compassion was going to have to be in there in some fashion or another. And it then just started to grow exponentially as it's one of the sort of the primary cornerstones of the human condition. And you're right, it's the one that no matter where we are in our in time and space is always relevant, unfortunately. But that's us.
Yeah, it's such a powerful notion, because you don't even, I was already, loving the prologue and moved by that act, and you kind of understand it even in the beginning, how big of a deal it is that these kids are saved, and then not thinking, it was a complete shock to me that was the seed of the Paniondomen, and it recontextualizes that moment in a really beautiful way, and I just found it to be incredibly powerful. I want to read this quote. I think this is Pranchol speaking.
Right.
One of our viewers, Ves, posted this quote in our Discord, and I think it's exquisite, and I'd love to get your reaction to hearing it. I'll post it in our chat as well.
A bit long. Okay.
A bit long. Bear with me. The hidden is slowly revealed. Look on these once enemies. You fight in your mind, raising up all the differences between us. You struggle to hold on to your dislike, your hatred of them, for that is familiar. Memories are the foundations of such hatred. Oh no, I guess this isn't Pranchol. Pardon me. I don't know who's speaking. But mother, memories hold another truth, a secret one, and that is all we have experienced. Yes, experiences. They are what we share, from opposite sides perhaps, but they are the same. The same. Experiences are the same between your two armies indeed, but also across the breadth of time. Among all who possess memories, whether an individual or a people, life's lessons are ever the same lessons. In all that is to come, think on forgiveness. Hold on to it. But know, too, that it must not always be freely given. It's clearly Silver Fox speaking, because the next line says, Silver Fox swung her sleepy gaze to Corlat, and the dark eyes suddenly hardened. Sometimes forgiveness must be denied.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Yeah.
I'm speechless.
Well, and maybe not that it's an unforgivable act, although such things exist, but it's maybe more to the case of there are limits to what an individual human being can actually manage in terms of forgiveness. And we have to be forgiving of that as well. In other words, the inability to forgive, one should be forgiving of, right? Depending on the context.
Wow. Yeah.
So it's, I think that's kind of what's being pointed to here in this section. You deny that forgiveness in order to protect yourself, depending on the circumstances. I think.
I love this quote, especially in context of, that 180 of understanding who the seer is and why they're doing the things they are and how all these things sort of came to be. That moment in the book, I mean, Jeff and I talked about it when we went through it, being like, if there's one thing we know, the seer is a bad dude. And then immediately getting that turned around. And in that moment, realizing that, they've lived this life of torment and are not in control of these pieces. The quote of being like, memories, like holding on to that hatred, and how quickly I was, as a reader, even knowing all of the horrible things that this person has done, being like, oh, well, that's not what you wanted to do. You were not in control of this. And how quickly I did feel compelled to be like, oh, I feel forgiveness for this being that I've, rooted against and wanted to see the downfall of the entire book. I love that quote in the context of that. And I'll be very curious, going forward, to see how that intertwines with other people's reactions when basically seeing how people receive that in the future.
I guess part of the thing I was exploring is the notion of, since thematically I'm discussing aspects of motherhood. Well, there's two elements of that. There is the mother, and then there's the child. And so the prologue has a surrogate mother, if you will, in Kalaba, when she collects up the two children, which is why there's indications that she has lost her child. She's recently given birth. So she does this kind of adoption. And as you say, is misguided, misinformed in what she ends up doing with the child. So that notion of to what extent is childhood a place of innocence? Where does that innocence end? How does it end? Who's responsible for the end of it? And what is lost when innocence is lost? I think is a prevalent theme, not just in this book, but in the entire series. I'm going to explore that a fair bit, because we are by nature more forgiving of the child than we are of the adult that the child has become. And yet, if we can understand where that adult came from, then that can quite often change how we view the adult. And so that stuff's being explored in the series. And I think a fair bit of focus went on it for this particular book. So when you get to House of Chains, have you started yet?
I have. I don't know if Anna has. Yes.
Okay.
I need it tighter to when we're going to talk about it, because I have a brain of a goldfish.
Yeah. No. Fair. Yeah. You're gonna. It's it's different.
It's different.
Yeah,
It's awesome, but it's different.
one of the things that this one, if you think about it, the first three books, I kept ramping up with the ending. So, as dramatic as the ending of Deadhouse Gates is, Memories of Ice just sort of hit, added steroids to the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
So, and I remember coming to the end of that and finishing, and Memories of Ice was unwieldy. It was the biggest thing I'd ever tried taking on at that time. And it was bursting at the seams. And even my editor said it was bursting at the seams, but he said I held it in place, so that was good. So then I thought, well, how do you one up that? And because I'm going to write 10 books, right? How the hell do I one up that? So my answer, you're coming to discover, and you will discover with House of Chains.
So exciting.
It's maybe not the direction you would expect, but it was my answer anyways.
Steven, if there's one thing I've learned, it is never going to be what I expect.
Good. That's the whole idea. Yeah. Surprise the reader. Absolutely.
Well, it is a joy to be surprised, and it has been such a joy to talk with you again. Thank you for being so generous with your time. We are so grateful to have the opportunity to ask questions of you and get a little clearer understanding. And it's been so much fun, our journey through these novels so far. So thank you very much.
Great. I'll throw some names out. Corsa Orlon in terms of pronunciation.
Oh, thank you.
Oh.
Right, yeah. Torvald Nom.
Okay.
I think there's Dathanar. Is there a Dathanar? I can't remember. Banisk for sure.
Banisk. Okay.
I don't know. I can't think of.
This
the
is
other
very
ones.
helpful.
This
We got to
is
do
great.
this every time.
Let's see. Who else do we run into? Leoman of the Flails. You're going to run into, and that's probably good enough for now.
Okay.
Of course,
Thank you.
I've read the first chapter, and it's like, whoa! I can't wait to talk about it with Lana.
Well, this is a case where everybody complained that I was jumping around through too many characters. So I thought, well, screw you guys. Yes, I can write one character's point of view for an extended period of time. So here we go.
Yeah. And it's something, man. It is all gloves are off. I can't wait to keep going, and thank you again for talking with us, and it's just great. So
well, I'm looking forward to your next set of programs. I wait on these ones with bated breath because they're such a blast to witness.
Well, thank you. That is an honor to hear.
Lot.
Yeah, it means a lot to us, very much so.
Cool.
All right. Thanks, folks. We'll be back next week with our first journey into House of Chains. I hope you'll be here with us. We'll see you then.
Bye-bye.